Pokken Tournament DX is one of my favourite games of all time. It combines my love of fighting games, especially Tekken, with my love of Pokemon. Unfortunately, the game's been out for a while now and has no sequel, which got me thinking, what if I would create my own dream hypothetical roster wishlist for Pokken Tournament 2? The most obvious pick on the list is Pikachu. He would play sort of like a mishmash of the two Pikachu characters in the original, but with a few new moves like Electro Web and even 10 million volt Thunderbolt as his burst attack. The OG Firestarter Charizard is guaranteed for Pokken 2. This non-dragon is almost as iconic as Pikachu and was a fun-to-play character in the first game, with moves such as Flamethrower and Flare Blitz. A more controversial pick, I feel Blastoise is deserving of a roster spot because of his high status of being the very first water starter, and one of the most iconic ones at that. His animations in the first game were amazing, and I would love to see them carry through to this one. As the original fighting type of Pokemon, Machamp is a shoo-in of an inclusion. His gameplay reflects that of a traditional fighting game grappler, with close-ranged punches and throws. Plus, let's not forget that his burst attack looks awesome. On the same note as Machamp, Gengar was the very first ghost type of Pokemon, and, still to this very day, my favourite. His animations look great and his gameplay is infuriating to fight against, with moves such as Shadow Sneak being very difficult to predict. Having a Mega Evolution is also increasing his odds to return. Choosing between Mewtwo and Shadow Mewtwo was tough, but I think in the new story of Pokken 2, there should be a new main villain to fight instead of Shadow Mewtwo. Nevertheless, Mewtwo is undefeatable in Pokken Tournament, with raw legendary status psychic moves and power rivaling Street Fighter's Akuma. Whilst it was very tempting to add the Hisuian variant Cleaver instead, Scizor will always be one of my favourite Pokemon that I just can't replace. His moveset in DX was perfect, and I wouldn't change a single thing about that nor his design. He is simply the best Pokemon. Speaking of the best Pokemon, Sceptile must return, being one of the most popular starter Pokemon to exist. I'm not normally a Grass starter fan, but Sceptile is just too good to miss out on the next Pokken Tournament. His Ninja-esque gameplay was incredibly fitting, and it was just too fun trying to trap your opponents in his many setup moves. Sceptile's fire-type counterpart Blaziken also must return. Blaziken acts sort of like the martial arts style fighter of the game, with his blaze kicks and fire punches giving off Taekwondo vibes, and the fire band his Mega Evolution gains makes him look like a true fighting master. As a polar opposite, Gardevoir uses ranged psychic attacks to damage and confuse opponents. These attacks can become so powerful they can create voids in matter. As a staple of the franchise, she definitely deserves to be included. It would have been no short of idiotic to not bring back Lucario. His moveset consists of Aura Spheres and Bone Rush attacks to face opponents head-on. His Aura ability would be included in his moveset as a small gimmick to give the fighter more life. I imagine Garchomp being a villainous character in the game's story. His aggressive and outraged appearance, along with the brutality of the fighter's move list, makes him a perfect antagonist. Maybe something happened to Cynthia, causing him to lash out at any and every Pokemon he sees. As the only fast and agile ice type, Weavile was a perfect addition to game balance. This, paired with his iconic appearance and his well-constructed moves, featuring Shadow Claw, Night Slash, and even Icicle Crash, makes him a well-rounded addition to the game's roster. Definitely the most unique fighter of the original roster, Chandelure makes her way in as a Zona character, using her ranged attacks like Will-O-Wisp and Shadow Ball to chip away at opponents' health. To be honest, the main reason I included her was that, well, she's a Chandelure and that's funny. The final returning fighter is the Alolan Grass starter Decidueye. This Pokemon has an amazing design and a powerful moveset to match. Ranged attacks like Spirit Shackle combine well with close-up moves such as Wing Attack, and this fighter's move list in the first game is very broken. The first newcomer, Sylveon, is one that I'm surprised didn't make the first game. Basically the mascot for fairy types at this point, she would use moves like Dazzling Gleam to take large chunks off the opponent's health bar, but looks sweet and innocent as she does so. She would also be a unique fighter and body type as this game's first bipedal Pokemon. Her fairy typing is why I chose her over other Eevee evolutions. Another character that I thought would be in the first game, Hawlucha would be your traditional fighting game grappler, but in the sky. He would use Flying Press to switch between ground and sky stances quickly, and his attacks would change in between stances. Snivy would be a lightweight rushdown fighter who would be able to close the gap between you and your opponent almost instantly. She would use a mix of moves like Leaf Blade, Leaf Tornado, and Leaf Storm in her move list. Yes, this pick was mostly because I went and replayed Poke Part 2 on the Wii. I'm sorry, I loved it. Greninja is the most heavily requested newcomer for Pokken 2, and I can see why. The winner of the Google Trends Most Popular Pokemon poll and Ash's longtime companion in the best series of the anime, Greninja would use a large variety of attacks and gameplay. Moves like Double Team and Substitute would be strong counters, and Water Sharking could be used as a distancing tool. Incineroar would be included as the rival of the earlier mentioned Hawlucha. Incineroar would use attacks like Fire Fang and Darkest Lariat to provide the player with a strong mix of close-up power moves. He would play the most like you would expect a textbook grappler fighter to fight. Yeah, I know most people don't think he should cross over from Smash to Pokken, but I think it would be too good of a fighter to miss out on, and I don't think we only need one starter from Alola, seeing as we already have two from Hoenn and Kanto. Weasel is an odd pick, but I think those are what make the Pokken roster so good. He would fight as a small rushdown-centered fighter, but with a large blend of close and far moves, including Aqua Jet to launch forwards at opponents suddenly, and Ice Beam to attack from a distance. Mimikyu felt like an instant pick to me, because of his unique type combination and even stranger design. He would play similar to Pikachu, but with more physical attacks rather than special, and an obvious lack of electricity. His burst attack could be his famous Z-move Let's Snuggle Forever. Another ghost Pokemon, Alolan Marowak is one of my personal favourite Pokemon of all time, but this isn't the only reason I included him. The roster was in dire need for regional variants, and Alolan Marowak is definitely the best one. He would be a perfect fighter for a more technical style of gameplay, and one that I imagine would be difficult to master, but equally as rewarding. Samurott is an underrated Pokemon for sure, and I believe he would be one of the coolest new Pokemon possibilities for this game. He would have a Shoto style of gameplay and use Razor Shell as dual-wielding blade move or Water Pulse as a Hadouken. He could also use his armour for cheap counters. Cinderace would be an interesting fighter and one that almost didn't make the list, but last minute I swapped him in instead of Inteleon, and I'm glad I did. No offence to Inteleon, but Cinderace would just be so cool, dribbling Pyro Ball all over the stage. I was struggling for a new representative of Bug types and Gen 9 when I stumbled across Low-Kicks. This Pokemon would be so entertaining to run and jump around the stage with, sending out Axe Kicks and Signal Beams. Low-Kicks would specialise in close-ranged combo attacks and work as a glass cannon. Tyranitar is probably my most wanted newcomer, and one that I'm shocked didn't make it to Pokken 1. Tyranitar would be a berserk fighter and the only one in the game to use rock-type attacks as the foundation of his moveset. Another pseudo-legendary Pokemon I want to see is Metagross. I think it's a cool shift to see a slow and heavy psychic type, and Metagross would complement this with overwhelmingly powerful steel moves. And whilst his attacks would be slow, his dodges would be quick as a flash, making for some rapid switch-ups in gameplay. Not to mention, his Mega Evolutions is one of the best in the series. Here's an oddball. Eastcue is definitely a weird pick, but one that I think could work. Eastcue has two forms, and so I think he could work as a stance character. When the battle starts, he's slower and more defensive, but if he takes enough damage, his Ice Cube breaks, and he becomes a faster but more frail fighter. His moves, however, would mostly stay the same. Tinkaton is my favourite Pokemon in Generation 9, and one that I knew I had to include right from the get-go. She would use her Steel Hammer for close-up and ranged strikes with heavy swings. I've not seen many people who even acknowledge Pawmot as a contender for a Pokken 2 roster slot, but I think it could definitely work. Being an electric fighting type, it could use moves like Thunder Punch to potentially paralyze the enemy, which would lower their attack speed. Beware would have the most raw power out of any fighter in the game, and paired with his above-average speed, he would be a beast in battle. Beware's only shortcoming would be his lack of ranged moves, so opponents would need to take advantage of this to succeed. Regidrago would be the ultimate zoner fighter, shooting out almost any special dragon moves, from Dragon Pulse to Dragon Rage to even Draco Meteor. Every blast would propel Regidraco backwards, making him a nightmare to fight against. His synergy burst would be his signature move, Dragon Energy. Finally, the main villain of the game, Giratina, makes an appearance, casting his shadow power over the enemy with every attack. Not to delve too deep into this game's story here, but he would have a move where he can momentarily take control over your Pokemon in shadow form. So this is my list of the 34 Pokemon I would add to a Pokken Tournament 2. Do you agree? Comment down below. This video was made with CapCut.